Guys, intro time.
Wait, which intro?
The wisdom check.
Oh, good.
Wait, no. I thought we were keeping the old intro. What's wrong with the old one? People like that one.
It was too long.
Yeah.
Too many fucking gifs.
Yeah.
Yeah. But can we keep the part where I yell more?
No.
But it's the intro to end all intros.
I got like what, 2 lines last time?
Do you want more lines, Tim?
Well, no, not really.
In a world without answers.
Yeah.
Wait, you want to start with that?
Here we go, exactly like last time.
Wait, okay, so we're doing it the exact same way? Let's start with the Smoky Bar.
No, it's a new season. We have to have a new intro.
More.
Not sure why we thought this would go any differently.
Oh, well. Welcome, everyone, to the Wisdom Check, where Jeff and Dustin welcome a guest every week to talk about Dungeons and Dragons. Welcome.
This is ridiculous. I'm starting the stream now.
Wait, where's my die at? Well, we can't start until I botch, and it's not an intro unless I'm botching.
You're on.
All right, we should be on right there. Hopefully not with the big giant black screen there for very long. I am Jeff, as usual. Dustin is on the other side over there. Hello, Dustin.
Hey, everybody. How we doing tonight?
And welcome to the Wisdom Check. As you can see, it is just the two of us tonight. That's because we wanted to sit around and get some conversations going about another one of those World of Darkness games we were all about. And that is Vampire the Masquerade. Now, we've kind of talked about Wraith, we've talked about Werewolf, we've talked about kind of the general World of Darkness a little bit. But we got a vampire game coming up relatively soon. I'm pretty pumped about it. And one of the things that's kind of unique, not necessarily totally unique, but largely unique to the World of Darkness is that it focuses a lot on your relationships, your contacts, your allies, something called retainer, which is kind of like people that work for you, influence, and all these sorts of ideas of how you're interacting and manipulating the world around you. And that's not always easy to represent in a game. I know, like, in the past, we kind of struggled with that when we were first playing World of Darkness games.
Well, I think, and we'll get into them more specifically. I think the merits, flaws, and backgrounds for Vampire in particular, and maybe just in the larger World of Darkness, they represent things in a very abstract manner, which for me sometimes is cool. The problem comes a lot of times where how people want to, when it comes to cost value for your XP, that's where you really hit kind of the weird, like everything about them works okay in a vacuum. Mm-hmm. And when we talk about them, people are going to have a hard time understanding why in a vacuum, like, it sounds like it's perfect system. Like, I don't know why more games don't do this. And then when you put them into application, that's where you find that things are maybe a little different. So we'll get into them more individually and how that's maybe true and false at the same time here as we move along.
Yeah. And one of the things in particular we kind of want to dig into as we kind of look into this is how the world has changed in reality. You know, like in 2020, it's very different than it was in the 90s. And so the technology has kind of changed what those relationships to influence are going to look like. The technology is going to influence just what it's like to be a vampire in general in those games, or just somebody up to shady business. You know, it's kind of like there's a big difference between doing crime in the 1920s and, you know, in modern day. So like things that you would get away with pretty easily back when we were first playing, I don't think are going to be things we're going to get away with now. Some of the ideas, kind of digging back into the kind of initial premise there. When we're talking about these ideas, maybe we should just kind of start with the overall. So we have, when you're building your character, you got a certain number of traits to put in different places all over all your characters. So your attributes, your skills, and then you have this section called backgrounds. And that's where you get a certain group of ability points you can plug in to things that are going to be specific to something in your background that gives you an edge. And those would be a lot of things. So like competing for the spots of allies, influence, status, and all these sorts of things. There are two abilities in the vampire world that are a little out of control. That's generation. We've talked about that before. That's basically how potent your blood is. how old your character is in a roundabout fashion. And that gives you a lot of statistical edge, in the general ass-kickery department. Then, of course, you got resources, which is how much wealth you have. And it's real hard to go wrong with more money.
Do you know why those two things are the king when it comes to backgrounds in World of Darkness, Jeff?
Probably because there's no interpretation needed.
You're damn right there's no interpretation. That's exactly what I'm saying. Generation is literally just power in every way, shape, and form. It's power. And money is money. And I mean, those are the two that are the most defined. Like, here is exactly what you get for your XP, and here is exactly what you can do with them based on your character. And all the others is like, yeah, you got like a group of people who sometimes do things.
Yeah, and
so it's a little harder to pin those down. Like, retainer sometimes becomes like the next go-to one, because if it's like you get to create a sheet, now you get to create a human sheet that has all those other things on it that you can accompany your sheet to and be like, oh, now I got all my bases covered. So like, if you get to make an actual sheet, retainer becomes the next like best one to go to then after that.
Yeah, and to kind of frame what a retainer is, retainer in the World of Darkness is somebody who works for you, kind of like, like a lawyer would be on a retainer. They take their time out to only really focus on you and your needs. So it'd be like a butler, like a driver, a bodyguard, something along those lines. And in the vampire world, hey, Chris Derps, hey, Malice, what's up? Debbie Snacks also. In the World of Darkness, there's also, in vampire in particular, there are things called ghouls, which are like people who drink vampire blood and get supernatural abilities and become, addicted and kind of blood slaves and all kinds of stuff. It's a little wacky. It's just a little step up on the manservant kind of idea. But, with those people, yeah, exactly, Malice, yeah.
You got it.
Yep, that's the exact phrase. So anyway, those people are, like you said, are a lot more fleshed out and defined. Whereas some of these other things we get into, like allies, influence in particular, those two ideas, and to a lesser degree status, I would say.
Contacts.
Yeah, contacts.
Contact is the other one. Allies, contacts, and influence are the really abstract ones.
Yeah, and so to kind of loosely define these things, allies are people who can do certain things for you. So like maybe you have a gang that you kind of run around with. They're not your boys in the sense that you can boss them around, but they're people that can kind of come in occasionally and do favors for you. Could be you're part of a union or something and you got union reps and things like that. It gets a little murky. Like there's some gray area where it kind of overlaps some of the other ideas, so it's kind of hard to define. So maybe we go into those other ones next. Contacts, those are people who you can get information out of. And the way the book kind of defines it, leaves it open-ended to whether it's a cooperative relationship or it's like a Dirty Harry kind of scenario where you're showing up and breaking people's bones and getting them to spill information, that kind of thing. But these are people who don't really have a strong relationship with you, and you kind of have to kind of grease their wheels a little bit, but they give you purely information. And do you have anything else to put on contacts there?
Well, what I was going to say is for contacts and specifically, I always think of contacts as purely information. I think the difference between an ally and a contact is an ally, you can get to go do things, like take physical acts in some way, shape, or form. And a contact is only merely going to provide you information. And you can reskin that in 1,000 ways. And it works. And where push comes to shove, and this is where, again, like fall back to the idea of retainer, or when you talk about how it compares to like ally or contact, is it easier to get allies in the motorcycle gang, or is it easier just to put the leader of the motorcycle gang on retainer?
Yeah,
which one gets you more mileage at the end of the day? Because allies won't show up to fight for you, but a retainer will.
Yep.
So you can and that's breaking action economies, everything else. Like again, this is a whole ball of wax about, and we've seen it power game every possible way through LARP and our tabletop sessions. It takes a skilled ST, which is in World of Darkness, it's STing. It's not DMing or GMing, it's STing. It takes a very skilled ST to find good ways to apply these backgrounds and balance them so that they all seem to have value.
Mm-hmm. And if that weren't enough, there's another one called influence. And this one
which really murks up the water. It really murks up the water once you add influence in.
Yeah, so influence is you have sway over some region of power. So like, that's a good example here, like police influence. Like you can influence them to do things. Or you have like, I don't know, like medical practitioners, or you've got, I don't know, university influence or something, like transportation influence. Like it's more like you're like almost like if you were like a government agent or something. You kind of had political favors you could trade to make things happen. So it kind of lives in that wiggle room area. Mm-hmm. But as you can hear from the way I'm describing it, there's a ton of overlap between that and allies.
Well, there's and again, is it easier to have influence in university? Mm-hmm. Is it easier just to have the university president as a ghoul? Mm-hmm. As a retainer, or is it easier to just take allies in university administration? Like you can have all three of those, and those technically all be the same people. Mm-hmm. Now you could pay for them each individually with XP if you wanted to, or different people could have that same thing locked down in three different ways. And then what do you do? Mm-hmm. So it sometimes, like I said, backgrounds are fantastic as a device for explaining a character. They get really, really, really weird when you're talking about having them. I think LARP really muddied it up just because it's very PvP. In most games where people are working together, they intentionally don't take the same allies and contacts and retainers, so everything works at a tabletop. It doesn't work quite as well when things get to be in a little going at each other sort of thing. And that's Vampire is intended to kind of be that way a little bit. So that's where Vampire maybe gets a run of it a little different than Wraith or how Werewolf might, where it's a little more cooperative. Yeah,
that's for sure. In the LARP community, there's a fair amount that you can do with these sorts of things like influence and whatnot. They created new systems to take these parts and make them more valuable. And
the downtime systems is really where they shined at that point.
And that was a completely new system that didn't really exist in the tabletop version. Now, Levi, as you're saying there, Leviathan, it's easier to let the ST decide on how these things function. Yeah, that's true. In the tabletop experience... What's that?
It's guaranteed to, because the book really doesn't tell you what to do with them. Mm-hmm. You just have them. It really doesn't give you a lot of direction. It's kind of like, hey, these things exist, and you have them. There you go.
Yeah. So, like what's being talked about with Malice, he's saying that a lot of times in LARPs, live action role playing, they built their own influence systems, and we did the same thing. So, like, we had stuff like, kind of think of your, I'm blanking on the name now. Not Grand Theft Auto, Saints Row, right? So, like, where you're competing for territory and stuff. I guess Grand Theft Auto kind of did the same thing. But kind of building influence and stuff. We kind of, like, tried to emulate that a little bit at our LARPs. So, like, you had downtime actions. You could send your allies to go do certain tasks, or get your influence in this certain area to get certain businesses going and that kind of stuff. And so, like, there was a little bit of that kind of written in on the side margins, but you really had to, like, tie it into something tangible, something valuable, to make people actually care about that, besides just kind of like a, strutting your stuff kind of, machismo.
Well, and if you want to really muddy up the waters, Jeff, each one of these has a dot system from 1 to 5. Mm-hmm. So then it's like, what's the difference between an allies 1, an allies 2, and allies 3? And can you take multiple allies? And can you take multiple influences and multiple contacts at different dot ratings? And how much of those overlap? And so, like, it spirals out of control pretty quickly once you have an influence system and a downtime action system kind of in place, because then each time you buy a new one, you get an extra action. Again, it's all about how you relate it back to action economy, and that's really where backgrounds. It takes a lot of time and skill as an ST to really hone that in.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and as Mouse is saying, the World of Darkness games, Vampire, Werewolf, Wraith, Mage, all these games were written more with the power on the ST side of things to just interpret and kind of be loosey-goosey. as compared to some of the other games we play, like Dungeons and Dragons. And I think that's pretty true. I think in a LARP setting where you have player versus player activity, I think there was more of a reason to be impartial and to be strict with a rule as written kind of scenario, as opposed to really interpreting things on the fly. Just, for a sense of fairness. But at a table, you can kind of be a little bit more free flowing with that. And yeah, mouse rules. Yeah, and as Leviathan's saying, when the backgrounds hit 0.5 out of 5, they get a little silly sometimes. Like, what does it mean to have 0.5 influence in police? Does it mean you literally control every cop that's out there? Like, like in the nation, the world, what does that mean?
And again, super cool, right? Until the next person who walks in takes a 2-dot retainer and as a police officer, then you're like, shit, I guess I own all the police except him. You know what I mean? Like it's like, that's like I said, that's where things get really, really muddy with backgrounds. And what's amazing to me is that you're into this system because it's so abstract. This seems like a system, Jeff, that would drive you nuts of not knowing what your shit can exactly do.
Yeah, well, there is that.
That's why everybody goes to resources and generation a lot of times, because it's finite, like it's guaranteed.
That is true. And as I spill my drink all over my shirt, that's awesome. Yeah, so I mean, it is rules loosey goosey. Yeah, that is an interesting thing, because longtime watchers of the show know that I am a computer science kind of guy. I like things to be precise, to mean a thing. You can actually, everyone can look at a thing and say, this is how this is going to work, so we can all play in the same sandbox together. I don't know, there's something about the World of Darkness. Maybe it's just the LARP side of it where it was a little bit more strict. That it just feels right. And what's Leviathan saying? Why do you not hate the lack of structure?
What do
You're
you
such an hypocrite. Yeah, I don't know. I'm actually trying to do a little introspection on that.
I'll tell you what I think it is. I think it is a fair amount of LARP, because what LARP did was it defined how these things work in extra systems that were put together through OWBN and through Elysium on the Prairie, which is the LARP we were in, particularly after it split from OWBN. We got the ability as STs to sit down and help define how these things were going to work and run them and operate them, that allowed for functional PvP and help bring the vampire world to life. And that is going to be a struggle for me with this tabletop game.
Yeah, it will be, because
that's where I'm going to struggle, because I have a lot of history of using those same kind of systems and creating those same kind of systems. Like, you were already asking me, like, are we going to do downtimes between games? And I'm like, why would we do that?
Because it's so fewer people. It'd be so easy to run. I don't know. Like, I think the kind of getting back to this, why am I a hypocrite kind of thing.
I was trying to give you a bridge out of there, Jeff.
I know. I saw the bridge. I turned around and walked back across it and caught it on fire. I'm not real sure. I do know that I spent a lot of time, Dustin and I, worked together making new systems for the LARP once we were kind of doing it independently. Like, I spent a lot of time making a blood map, where people could go and feed, and like how you can cultivate who's living in certain areas and the feeding conditions, and you can poach and catch poachers and like all kinds of stuff. We modified how, downtime actions worked. We've done a lot, and maybe it was just fertile ground for that. I think for the World of Darkness, though, I think for me, it's just that the setting is so nuanced, rich, complex, and interesting. Like all the different story elements, and what the characters do, and what the story is doing to those characters, that it gives these loosey-goosey story elements a bit of cover for me.
I think what it boils down to at the end of the day is that I think it's two things. One, I think it's, if there's one thing that we do know about you, it's that you like to create a system where none exists. So what this did was it was a door. It was a door to work. It was a door that said, Jeff, come through the door, and there's work on the other side. that involves having to crunch numbers to make things seem like they work. And that's bait for Jeff. If you want to get Jeff in on a project, chat, let me tell you how to do it. You give Jeff just enough rope that he'll go off into the room and just go with it from that point on. Like you just give him just a tad bit of a touch. Like, hey, here's this idea I've got, but I don't know how to make it work yet. And Jeff will run with it from there. And then like 3 days later, you'll have a system put together. Like that's how you get him in.
It is fun. Yeah, you get me started on something, I'll go. I have a lot of inertia. Momentum is my thing, I think. Yeah, it's either nothing or everything. There's no in between. Yeah, so anyway, like kind of getting out of my sticky quagmire of that. Yeah, I think there's something interesting about just the way you're expected to deal with things in the World of Darkness. So like as a vampire, you're doing stuff cloak and dagger from the shadows. You're subtle, even in your overt actions, you're trying to still be hidden. And a lot of it is like petty bullshit, like intentionally petty stuff. Like your characters are just bored because they're so fucking old. So like they're messing around with influence because like, why not? That's what we can do, right?
Right.
So like it gets pretty interesting.
I've always considered it to be, so yeah, you're right. Like sometimes a vampire's doing things just because they're bored.
Mm-hmm.
I've always figured that even the oldest vampire has these things in place just because it makes unlife easier.
Mm-hmm.
Like these are conveniences to the vampire. Like a vampire can easily go to sleep and let all of it rot away for 1,000 years, wake up and have to reestablish all those things again. And sometimes that's just easier for them. They will, sometimes it's the path of least resistance. A vampire will just be like, I'm taking a nap. I will wake up and all of this is done and gone. And retainers are all dead. Allies they knew are gone. And just wake back up and be like, I got to start from scratch. But that was easier than dealing with all the werewolves that were trying to kill me 100 years ago. Like, they don't remember me now either. So, you know, like for me, a vampire, when they have these things amassed and they built that underneath them, it's to make their unlife easier. It's to allow them to go out and do things, allow them to get things done that they need done, to make a status move or to do these other things, to get a position in the city. Like those things are they're just there to help make unlife easier. And that's the approach that I'm taking with them in my game.
In this particular game? Yeah.
In this particular game.
Well, that's an interesting interpretation. I can see that. I mean, a lot of it seems like it plays into the concept of status as well. Like you kind of touched on a little bit there in like politics in the city. One of the other backgrounds is status. And that's another one of those like weird, like gray area nebulous things. Because like you could have status in a particular sector, again, police. You might actually have a rank, you know, that kind of thing. But in LARP, it was usually used to define your pecking order in a city, like what your political clout was. And whereas in tabletop, you can just put dots in and say, like, that's my stuff. I got that. It's really kind of meant to be kind of a fluctuating value, right?
That shows you how long it's been since I looked at status, because I totally, when I read status on the background list, only thought of it as kindred status. I totally forgot you could take like status as a police officer yourself. So again, back to our model of how backgrounds get real murky real quick. Somebody can have allies 5 police. Someone else can have a police retainer of the police chief. And another person can literally have status 3, I was a cop. And somehow you all have influence in the same police system. And it's like, how do you mitigate? How do you even deal with that? Like it's like it's so layered. I almost feel like there's like, I think what we did with LARP was really the only way to handle it. And some of that was just due to pure numbers, but it was like these dots represent X number of XP on a sheet or X number of actions in a downtime system. Like those are the only things that made those dots really have full value at the end of the day. In a tabletop, it's a little different because again, you're dealing with 5-6 players. They're probably not overlapping as much. So it's like, hey, we need this done, and this is what's going down. Oh, I've got the 3 dots in police. Oh, I happen to have a retainer who's a newspaper person, so I can get the news article to say what I want it to. And even though they're taking some of the same actions an ally might, they're the only one at the table who took anything that has to do with it. So that, and so it works almost easier in a tabletop than it does in a more massive world of LARP.
Yeah, it's interesting because like Leviathan's saying, he felt like status makes your friends at the table hurt you or hate you. It's like your friends bought status, so now you're the boss. Yeah, in our group, we've kind of got a tendency towards kind of egalitarian rule. Like we don't want anyone to be above or below anybody else in the group. So like I think as a tabletop group, we shy away from concepts of rank and that sort of leadership and that kind of stuff. Whereas it's a pretty integral component of at least the vampire culture, also werewolf culture in their own way.
Werewolf doesn't let you avoid it.
Mm-mm.
Werewolf does not let you avoid it. Like the other games may not touch on it much at all, but Werewolf's like, nope, here's your rank, fool. Like,
yeah,
here you go. Like,
well, they tied it to your powers in that game, so
yeah.
You know?
That's what I'm saying. You can't avoid it. Like you're gonna be a whatever. Like that's all there is to it. So
yeah. So there's our groundwork of the world of darkness is murky and gray and dark.
Yeah.
Opaque. So we're putting together the new game, right? Or rather, Dustin's putting together a game, and we're gonna play in it. And I'm just gonna like show up and be like, yeah. So
super excited.
You told us not to put any backgrounds on our sheet, and
that's right.
So now I'm kind of interested in what you're doing with them. I know that you're setting us currently in 2020 or thereabouts. And so that's going to change how stuff works, how we deal with technology and, that kind of thing. You're also putting us in a town that we're not from, if I recall, right? Like you're putting us in a small town outside of some major area.
Outside of the city you were effectively poached from.
Okay. And
but
so
it's not like you haven't been like relocated across the country. Mm-hmm. It's just that you have been embraced and you're being taken to a safe house for fledgling vampires, if you will, mm-hmm. so that you can be put through the accounting and through the accounting is mm-hmm. the word I'm looking for. So, and during that time, you'll be in this little smaller town where they can, I guess, for lack of a better word, like kind of just vampire training ground. Like, hey, we're going to teach you how to hunt out here where we can control things better. You're not mm-hmm. going to have crap go on inside the city where there's a few thousand people at any point in time walking on the streets, all of them with a phone in their hand mm-hmm. that can now record you. Like, that's a different world than in the 90s when we used to play vampire. Like, mm-hmm. There's a lot of things that's going to go into some of that I'm taking time to try to consider, like how those things are going to look. So one of the reasons I didn't have you put backgrounds on your sheet is because you're all going to be fresh embraces. You're really not going to have them.
That you can sugarcoat all you want, but Father Charity's right. You're killing us all in session 0. And so no backgrounds are necessary.
Actually, that's not true. Well, technically you're right, because they're all going to die. They're all going to die, and then they're going to be reborn as vampires in session 0. So yes, they'll all be.
Yeah. We were running Masquerade, Malice. So we're going back to the old school.
Yeah, I considered Requiem, but a fair number of the guys in our group did not really. Oh man, pun time. They didn't really embrace Requiem as well as me and Jeff did. Oh man. Oh, if only Brendan was here for the puns.
That was nice. That was
good. They didn't embrace it. No.
If you weren't a vampire player, embracing is the term for turning somebody into a vampire. Yeah, so like there are some substantial differences between the two, and I think there's just a stronger nostalgia component for our players, the one that they played more of. But yeah, anyway, so like this kind of situation is going to be interesting because I assume this means we're going to have to earn any of these backgrounds during gameplay.
Yes.
So
correct.
That seems like a more natural way of doing things. I mean, obviously your character is a person who had things before they were converted, and usually vampires are going to choose somebody who has some kind of value, whether it's like that person's really attractive, I really think they're smart, they have a lot of influence in this or that, blah, 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 blah. Yeah. So maybe players are more prone to be people who have these influences and contacts and allies and, all these other things. But apparently in this one, we're people who have none of that shit.
So not necessarily true. That's not necessarily true.
Yeah,
I think
okay.
the difference is that the accounting is an interesting thing.
It is, yeah.
Because in a modern society, and I'll be the first to admit this for people who may be watching this, who are avid Vampire fans of the new edition. I haven't read the new edition yet.
Mm-hmm.
So the new edition, I think, talks about and handles how vampires are handling some of this advances in our modern world since the more recent edition, which was 15 years ago or whatever it was,
Mm-hmm.
pre-Requiem, I guess you could say. But so because I haven't taken the time to go through and read all of fifth edition, whatever they call it. It's got its own term.
Yeah, V5.
V5, is that what they're calling it? Yeah, V5. Because I haven't read all of V5 yet. What I'm doing is I'm taking the version that we all know and understand that we played in the late 90s, and I'm just updating it based on what I wanted to do for this story. So I've got an idea. Some of the things that you're discussing are very much at the core point of what the game is.
Mm-hmm.
And I can't say anything more of that without spoiling it, but
That's
those
fair.
things have been taken into account. I think that your player characters are people who probably did have a friend or who had this, at the other, but because the modern world is so camera driven and phone driven and social media driven and viral, that vampires can no longer allow a fledgling vampire who has not been fully under the accounting to just trounce around in the streets being a vampire till they figure it out.
Mm-hmm.
Like, there's too much on the line to keep the masquerade in check. So they have to take you out of your situation where those allies, contacts, and stuff, and basically those relationships are going to kind of fade. You're going to lose your job because you ain't showing up for a few weeks. Like,
Sure, yeah.
You're going to be, and then you're going to re-show back up claiming you've been to rehab, claiming you've been on a vacation, whatever you got to, and you have to reestablish yourself.
Sorry, I got to work night shift from here on out.
Right? Yeah.
Non-negotiable. Non-negotiable.
Right, and I mean, a lot of normal mortals live a normal day cycle. Like, you can't go back and reestablish yourself as police chief.
No,
you can't go back and do that anymore. Like, you have to take a demotion, go to knights, and now you're back down to .1 status of police when you decide to buy it again. So to have you guys buy these things with XP, and to then, I get to do what you like to do best. I get to redefine these very abstract ideas of what backgrounds are.
Mm-hmm.
I don't get to redefine what the skills are. The skills are the skills.
Sure.
I don't get to redefine the attributes. The attributes are the attributes. The disciplines are still the disciplines.
Mm-hmm.
What I get to define, though, is the rest of the world, which is, for World of Darkness, contained in these backgrounds.
Right. Yeah, it's going to be interesting. I know part of why you did it was to have more influence from the chat, because we're streaming this content. And
sure.
We're kind of building these kind of components to allow more interaction with our fan base, because you guys like it. Yeah. So there's that. But I think it is an interesting approach, because realistically there is, like you say, a huge difference. There's a massive change in how your life would go, like being converted into vampire culture. You're suddenly thrown into this weird world where all your past relationships got to be severed. I'm trying to think of like good examples of that, but I don't know. It's an interesting thing, like, because I think that creates the conditions to force vampires towards each other, right? Like,
right.
Like when your culture is completely stripped from you, and the day-to-day of your life is taken away, and now there's other people who have that same condition imposed on them as well. Now you have something in common. You want to go see other people like that to deal with the stuff that you have in common, especially as a new vampire dealing with all the crazy stuff that goes along with that. It's a good bonding kind of experience, and it's probably why vampires are as social as they are.
Well, and again, this is at the very, I guess, getting into more setting information about what I'm doing with my game. This is very much the philosophy that the Prince has.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas I think with standard Vampire, the way we played it 20 years ago and into our early LARP days, vampires were very much whisked away by their clan, put into a group of everyone else who's the same as them as a clan, and thus clan politics were a very big thing because the numbers in each clan determined a certain amount of how much influence and power they had in the city as a vampire, just in general. So it was a lot of, hey, there's 2 Toreadors and 15 Nosferatu at game this week at LARP. Like, good luck, Toreador. Like, you're not going to make a move. So they would do their individual things, and they would, hang out with the Ventrue a little more than they should, because they were the ones that were most likely to be able to work together to offset the pure number of Nosferatu running around.
Sure.
So, those number of games are important to Kindred, but everything was really based around clan. When we went on to play Requiem, the opposite happened.
Yeah.
No longer were people shuffled into clan because a brand new level of society was put in with the Covenant. The Covenant was, there were like 5 of them, and they were just kind of like, that was really like your new clan, but it was made up of different clans. So what I'm looking to do, and what this prince of this city has decided, and there's no covenants, of course, there's just the Camarilla and the Sabbat, which I'm equating to basically vampire political parties.
Sure. Yeah.
They're philosophical. The covenants were cool, the clans were cool. I like having the power dynamic between the two fluctuate back and forth in Requiem, and that's why I really liked about Requiem was that those, which one was more important at any point in time, could flip-flop very quickly. But what I want to do for Masquerade, because we're back to playing Masquerade with this game, is I want to create, the prince wants to create a scenario where cooperation of the clans is installed basically from the embrace. So you are not only relying on other members of your clan to establish, but you're being put into essentially a cold dorm with 3 or 4 other people from other clans. And thus are forced to work together to understand your new life as vampires in a mixed group, as opposed to being ushered off individually into clans. So it's almost like the artificial formation of coterie.
Yeah.
In a way that makes coterie make more sense. And it's, in a way, I didn't think of it at the time I was doing it, but I realized what I did was I reached back into my experience as a member of a college fraternity.
Sure.
Where me and 15 other guys were brought in, all from various backgrounds, stuffed into a room, gone through a ritual initiation, and then we're sent out as the one or whatever class of Phi Gamma Delta, and boom, there we were a pledge class, like, and we did all those things together, and we had all these, but we had this group identity because we came out in this group, and we went through all that. We went through all that learning and everything together as a group. So while it's not exactly what I'm going for with this, it's to push more for the vampire coterie aspect to form through this. It's something to help make coteries make more sense in a world where coteries normally would not make sense, because you would be pulled apart by clan, you'd be pulled apart by covenant. This is a way that the prince is maintaining peace on the Camarilla side by forcing more interaction at the ground level of when people are allowed to be embraced because I give them permission. I give them permission 3 to 4 or 5 at a time. And this is how they go through this process if they want to enter my city.
Gotcha. Yeah, and
so
for anyone in the chat who doesn't know what the word coterie is in this context, coterie is the word for party in typical Dungeons and Dragons kind of sense. In theory, it's the people you like to hang out with that happen to be of your same type, vampires. And they tend to be a mixed hodgepodge group because, players are hodgepodge players and they make different characters. So there's kind of like this notion of your group, the people you hang out with. And it could be a little tricky to kind of suss out why you're together, But
a lot of times they make no sense.
And I think it's really good to have that, again, that kind of twist and pull kind of dynamic of we are friends, we're part of the same coterie, but we do have these dynamics pulling us apart in some ways, as much as we're trying to hold ourselves together.
Right, and this is a dynamic that's being pushed by city leadership. Now, at the next level down in leadership, where you have the Primogen are the heads of each clan, you know, and you got people like the Harpy. Some of those people are maybe more in line with pushing what the Prince wants, but like you get to the Primogen, like they're heads of clans, like they want their clan to matter. So that's where you get a little more of that comes back when you start dealing with the next level, the next rung down of important people. Once you're past city officers and you're into the actual clan leadership, like you get a little more of that in there. So
yeah. So okay, we got this kind of interesting kind of dynamic. You know, in your game, you're setting us up for coterie to make sense. We're having this, you know, pledge class of new vampires going through the accounting.
Yep.
The accounting is really interesting if you don't know the traditions of vampire culture. We kind of touched on it a couple episodes back, but the accounting is essentially the creator of a vampire is responsible in kind of like the way, like biblically, like parents were responsible for their kids up until they're adults. You know, so any sin of the child is carried out on the you know, the parent, essentially. In this case, the vampire that created you, and they're responsible for everything. So you're making sure you don't violate, you know, the different laws of the city, you know, of your particular group of vampires, you know, your political affiliation. They're expected to teach you all the ins and outs of what everything means, and you know what other people do, and how you feed, and like all these things. So
to help reestablish you. I mean, at the end of the day, they just help reestablish you.
Mm-hmm. So rather than just, you know, I bitch you, made you a vampire, and just toss you on the street, figure it out, kid. There's expected, at least in the political group called the Camarilla, that you take the time to actually put these people through it. And it's an interesting thing that you oftentimes kind of just gets skipped over in games, you know.
Right.
And it's I think really important to understand how that plays out, because it shapes a lot of what you would interpret the culture of vampires to be later on.
Right.
And you know, that was something I really wish that, like, when we did LARP, we required all new players to start as new vampire or like a ghoul or something. You know, take you through, teach you what's going on, and then put you in a situation where you're a full-fledged member. So I'm really digging this idea. I like this idea a lot because of that. You know, we have some people who haven't played vampire before, which I think we do in the group. It's going to be really a great way of bringing them into it. For our audience, it's going to be really good.
I was going to say, it's really going to be good for the audience.
Mm-hmm.
Like, because they'll get to get some ideas and sense of like how these things are and kind of how they work. Like,
mm-hmm. Absolutely. So, yeah, I guess let's kind of look back into how you're doing influence and stuff.
Sure.
Since it's kind of like where we're kind of looping around a bit. Now, I know we're doing some of it due to, you know, chat interaction, but aside from that, what are you looking to do, and how are you trying to use the influence systems and allies and contacts and stuff like that? Like, how do you interpret them?
Well, for me, I'm a scientist by trade. For those of you who maybe are joining for a first time, those of you who've been around a while know I'm a scientist. For me, it's things like retainers, allies, contacts, influence, like we discussed. For me, it's a matter of how much magnification you want to put on that
mm-hmm.
sphere of reality. So when you're talking like an influence like the university, right? Like you could take influence university, and that's overall influence across the entire campus. Now, you know, you can take or you could take allies in university, and that's a smaller group within the university, somewhere mm-hmm. inside of it. Or you can take a retainer who is a specific person.
Mm-hmm.
And for me, those things are weighed back and forth based on the amount of dots that you have to weigh into them.
Mm-hmm.
So like if you want the university president, he is a .5. You cannot have him at .1.
Sure.
You have to purchase him up to 5 if you want to have him in your pocket.
Mm-hmm.
But then he's only one person on a board who gets to make a decision. So he can't just make everything happen at the university on his own. So,
right.
You know, you have to counterbalance the purchase based on how far you're magnifying back out. And so, like I said, for me, it's like it's like the objectives on my microscope at work. Like, depending on how much fine detail I want to look at, depends on how much I have to magnify on the slide to see. In the same way, I feel like that's how influences and those are layered. So when I'm building my systems, I'm starting at the most individual layer. I'm starting with retainer. Okay. And on my last GM show, I had chat help me make 100 on the spot retainers.
Mm-hmm. I'm not saying they're some of the greatest retainers to ever retain, but
they won't be the greatest retainers until you guys start randomly rolling which ones are going to show up.
Oh yeah,
and then and I'm figuring out how I'm going to have. I mean, I'm having chat be involved on my GM prep show, helping me create these things. So they're involved at the creation process, which some of them are really getting into, and they really enjoyed getting to do that part. Mm-hmm. What I got to figure out next then is how to have chat interact with them live during session. That part I haven't quite nailed down yet. But once I got retainer figured out, because, okay, you want an individual, here's how you can pick your individual. I'm basing everything off social medias that we have in our real lives. Mm-hmm. So I'm going through the list of different social medias, some that are kind of defunct now even, but that have existed over time, like Foursquare or, and just figuring out, like, if it was, what did this, like, social media do that worked better than if you were going to do something with this, which social media would you go to for it? Mm-hmm. Like, if you wanted something to be influence, is influence more Instagram, or is it more TikTok, or is it more Facebook? Like, which one of those really screams influence? I think of it as larger, more encompassing, or to make a change with. So, for me, it feels a little more Facebook-ish. It's a bigger system. It's more widespread. To me, it's a little bigger in that way. Now, it doesn't matter which one I pick at the end of the day, but
interesting.
Whereas I think of information as something that's a little quicker, 140 characters or less. I think like Twitter. So then what I have to do is just reskin them to make it so it's like you're passing along information between you and your contact at 140 characters apiece. Mm-hmm. So you literally have to send your messages in 140 characters or less. So, because it just keeps it so that you're not sending entire books back and forth to each other. Like, it's just going to have that sort of the kindred have taken what mortals have created and have adapted it to make kindred life easier. Well, make kindred life more simple.
So here's something I'm sure you've already considered and already have something figured out for, and I'm teasing it out of you here. But one of the big concerns of vampires and their culture is that they monitor the masquerade. So the masquerade is like pretending that they don't exist, that everything is hunky-dory, everything is just the world as it is. So they have this in place because, in theory, if mortals figured out vampires existed, they outnumber mortals like 100,000 to 1 or some nonsense, and they can, kill you in the daytime. So Inquisition's bad, right?
Right, so, Inquisition's bad.
Real bad, okay? And it doesn't matter really how powerful you are as a vampire. Enough weapons will take you down. And so they institute this thing. It's very important to the culture, punishable by death for violating it, that kind of stuff. So when you're influencing the culture in a way that they're using social media and stuff, are you going the route of creating their own internet? And their own apps and stuff that are completely, firewalled apart?
Yep.
Good. Okay.
Like the dark web. It's essentially the dark web, whereas it exists, and maybe some humans who are conspiracy nuts find ways to hack into the dark web. And then they come back with all these crazy ideas about lizard men who run the country. And everyone else shuns them for their stupid ideas. Mm-hmm. Meanwhile, maybe they're right. Maybe there are lizard men running the country. But it's essentially, yes, their things are run off of what I've at this point have only coined in my notes as the blood.net.
Mm-hmm. Now, how ubiquitous is this? Is this like some vampires are in the know? They have they're tech savvy enough that they put this together and they know how to operate it, and then other vampires come to them.
All the kindred who have been through the accounting will know how to use these apps, because these kindred. I'm creating a city where neonates rule. because they're the only ones who understand the technology that makes their life easier. The
Batman
old
or the
archaic ways, even ones that were embraced and stuck in the 90s, if you were to take someone from the 90s, pluck them out of time and put them into today, they would not be able. There's a flaw that I refer to as anachronism. And it's a flaw you can take in the game as a vampire. It's like a 1-point flaw. But it basically says that you're so old you don't understand modern things. And we used to think of as someone, oh, my character was embraced in 400 AD, and now he's in the 90s and doesn't understand the camera. You're talking about people who look at a camera, they're like, wait, there's a camera on your, why is that device in your hand? Like, they don't even the idea of a cell phone is nearly, wait, everyone has these things now, and they do what? And you can order pizza from your phone without having to call somebody. You just punch a button. Like, there's an app for these things. Like we have so quickly advanced this technology that even kindred that are not generationally that old, if they did not adapt to this stuff, would be so left behind. In the same way that humans in our society who don't have the internet could have a harder time. How do you apply for your jobs if you don't use Indeed? How are you searching for a place to live if you're not on? How are you vacationing without looking for an Airbnb? Right. Like, how are you doing these things where these things are at your fingertips and people who are using them are finding success so much quicker than people who aren't? Well, the same thing is true for kindred. So a lot of elders just simply can't compete with the speed that information moves around them because they're still trying to tie notes to pigeons and animalism control them to go deliver a note to somebody, which we did in LARP. Like that was sometimes how information traveled in LARP. So,
and there are good reasons for that, right? So, like, kind of getting back to that concept of the masquerade, there were other reasons to use these kind of archaic methods, and some of that is that there are supernatural abilities to overhear conversations or get into people's heads, or if you sent the message through a phone, it could be intercepted, hacked into. If you had somebody take the message to somebody, they can be dominated or use presence on them to force them to spill the beans. So sometimes you want animals as your go-to. So, like, I think it's a kind of an interesting dynamic that could play in here, kind of like Battlestar Galactica, the TV show, right? The newer version that came out. They had, the Battlestar Galactica was like the old school model. Everything was analog, no digital computers on the whole thing. And they make it. They're like, okay, well, we did this intentionally. We're a shitty boat, but damn it, you can't fuck with us. And it's kind of like that. It's, this extra layer of security just by being different. Now, are you taking it like it's kind of clunky and staged down like that? Or is this like full on tech is, modern, pristine, and beautiful?
No, here's the thing. Here's the way I view it. And again, I haven't read V5, so I don't know how they're interpreting it. From what I understand, they're kind of going the other direction with it, which is an interesting play. But I feel like any mortal who has a good idea that's going to change society, as I think somebody joked having Zuckerberg as a ghoul, but that is exactly what would happen.
Yeah.
Anyone with a good idea, if there were true kindred within an earshot of any of it going on, they would be scooping that motherfucker up, and whatever they created, the kindred would be bastardizing it for their own purposes. Okay. So I don't see any way where these things exist and only mortals have it, and the kindred are like, nope, I still send my messages strapped to rats. Like, I don't know if I can get behind the idea that is the norm. Now, I'm not saying there isn't. It's just like mortals. See, to me, the kindred are mirrors of the mortals they're plucked from. How many people do we know in our lives who, and not to get too topical about something going on right now, but how many people do we know just simply won't take a vaccine?
Right.
How many people do we know refuse to put any of their information anywhere on the internet? Like, just anywhere at all. Meanwhile, I'm over here plugging in Amazon, buying all my Christmas, and I'm over there, doing all this. Like, my shit's everywhere, right? Like, so, I mean, I think that most people fall into the latter boat, but we all still know a few people the tinfoil hat crowd, if you will. So I imagine there's still those people amongst the kindred, and they're probably older kindred.
There's probably a lot
Ones
more of them. Yeah.
I mean, again, you're talking about a whole nother level of younger, even past millennial kindred at this point. Like, you know, that their vampires are plucking from. So, you know, these are somebody who becomes, you know, you can't necessarily embrace an influencer on TikTok because you can't keep putting him out there on camera after the fact. So he becomes maybe he's somebody you can't embrace, but you can sure make him a ghoul. You know, you can still get your paws on them and then still get hold of their creation or their ability to influence. So when you think about how Kindred would utilize these systems where so much of modern humans' time is spent on a device that they carry in their hand and not even in their pockets anymore. They literally never put them down, some of them. And when they're walking through the streets, you think of events, you're trying to dominate somebody, and the first thing you have to do is establish eye contact.
Good luck. Like, I'm just saying, here's people these days. Like, but that makes the masquerade easier. Embracing for TikTok follows.
Yeah. But that makes the masquerade easier. Most of them aren't looking up.
It can, yeah. But the idea of, oh shit, what's that? And holding up the camera.
No, exactly. And that's why these things are, that's the route I'm going with this, is that the modern prince and the city have not only embraced and utilized all this technology and created these apps to make kindred life easier, but they're doing it in the name of the masquerade, because sending the rat or the carrier pigeon with the note's cool till 10 people decide that they take a viral video of it and send it out there, you know, even if they never read what's on the note. Like, carrier pigeon seen in Chicago is, you know, obviously going to be something that you don't see every day. Like, so not necessarily breaking the masquerade, but could lead to somebody wanting to investigate further, you know, who's using pigeons to carry messages around Chicago. Like,
you encrypt your pigeons. That's great.
Encrypt your pigeons. Yeah.
Well, okay. So part of the reason why I asked this question is there's a certain aesthetic to the World of Darkness, right? Like, it's grungier, it's run down, it's a darker, worse kind of place. It's the real world, just not as good. So it's like that world of like The Crow, you know, like
so all the kindred cell phones have cracked screens. We all know that. So.
Yeah, exactly. But you know, like, one of the things I was thinking about is when I look at what stuff looks like, right? So like a slick app that's like smooth and polished and everything. There is a certain type of like inhumanity to that, I guess, you know, and that it's just polished and clean and corporate. But then there's also the idea of like the dark net kind of thing where it's like black screen, green text, you know, and clunky mechanical keyboards, you know, typing in. You have to know the special passwords and shit to get in there, and it's like all seedy and dark and World of Darkness-y. So I wasn't sure which route you were going to go with that. Like, one of the concepts that I would think of if I was a vampire is I would probably do just a city infernet, you know, so like it's just within the city only. You couldn't tap in from outside, and then that way it was compartmentalized. So I don't know, is that an idea you're thinking about doing, or you just keeping this World Wide Web kind of thing?
Like most World of Darkness games, you typically deal with a city domain, and everywhere else out there you can claim has the blood net if you want to, but no one's interacting with it because you're not going anywhere else. Part of the appeal for the World of Darkness, for me in particular, Vampire, is that you're pretty much stuck in the bed you sleep in. Like, you crap in your own neighborhood and you have to deal with that crap. Like, it's not D&D. You're not overland traveling. You're not getting on buses and going from town I put you in to city 4 hours away. You're like, at best, town I'm in, and the actual city, you know, you're in the suburb, and 5 miles over there is the city itself. Like, you're small town, maybe within a 10-minute drive. Like, you're not overland traveling away from things. So yeah, I mean, I'm only worrying about it for this domain. How it applies to the larger internet or how other cities are handling it is really not my concern. I can assume they have it. I assume that the prince probably has a few other nearby princes that he probably has some sort of level of contact with, and if one of them is old enough that they require carrier pigeons, and so be it, he probably still uses one now and then.
Mm-hmm.
But it's just not the normal. In the same way, like you could still send mail through a mail with a stamp to a friend if you want to in the modern day. Like those still exist. They're just unless you're doing it just for the novelty of it, like you're probably not doing that. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, that's right,
Christers.
yeah.
Some of them are still on AOL. Some of them still have Yahoo Mail. That's all I'm saying. They're just some of them are still in Yahoo. Like,
yep. So I mean, some of the reason why I like some of these ideas of kind of like isolation, right? So like if you only had the internet, it squeezes the world down even further. It's like this is all there is, you know, like the world outside of here is dark, murky, nebulous shadowland, you know.
Right, but I mean, we're dealing with a world where the internet exists as moral. I mean, forget if the Kindred have their own special one. The internet exists.
It does.
So if you're playing in the real world and the internet exists, you can just get on the internet with a fake identity as a Kindred then and just do the same things. You could have fake accounts on Facebook and Instagram, and we could just use the real ones and just claim we're using all of those. But for me, it's more interesting to have this idea that the Kindred have bastardized them all.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
So, I mean, I would rather do that than have people legit like, well, I'm going to type a tweet out and try to use my influence to get it retweeted 5,000 times. Like, to me, it's much cooler to think that the Kindred have their own other way of doing this. And that maybe just the pure actual influences are the actual mortal social medias are the real influences, and the Kindred ones are the other ones.
Yeah. So, I mean, this is going to be some interesting stuff because, like, there's all sorts of weird shit you can get up to in a World of Darkness game. Like, you can try to run a nightclub, or, you know, maybe you have a certain domain within the city, like this 6 blocks are our coteries, and like we have to build this up in some way or maintain it. Are you looking to kind of get into that sort of thing, or are you looking to keep it more street level? Okay.
It's gonna be a little bit of both. You guys as a coterie have been taken to a small rural town just on the outside of the major city, like again, where you can be taught the accounting in a place where you have a lot more ability to not break the masquerade if anything goes awry, but you're also being put there to establish and build up that area because it is also a place where there's a Sether political party that sometimes creeps up. And if anyone was going to stage any sort of attack or any sort of infiltration or anything like that from the Sabbat into the Camarilla held city, they would have to get some footholds in these smaller towns. So the prince uses these as places where he can help refortify some of these fringe areas to also then just monitor for the Sabbat.
Gotcha. Okay, that's cool. Now, Malice brings up a good question. It's one I was wondering myself. He wants to know if COVID is going to exist in your World of Darkness game.
I mean, it could. But as far as illnesses go, unless somebody takes the flaw of Plague Carrier, like, I don't know if it's going to come up in a meaningful way.
I think it would be really difficult to feed.
It doesn't. It is and it isn't. Like, okay, let's just call this what it is. I mean, you live in a bigger city or near a bigger city. I live in a very rural one. It is no harder to feed right now for a Kindred than it is here in my town than it would be on any other normal day.
Well, in some ways,
people are not that holed up. And again, herd is a background.
Herd is a background. Herd, for those of you who don't know, herd is a established group of people who allow you to feed on them.
So, you know, people are on quarantine. They're home. Maybe, like, sure, if you were working on a specific herd, you could have something like that affect a specific part of the herd. Like if your herd was school teachers and school's out because of COVID, sure, I could throw that in there. I don't think it's really the focal point of what I'm working towards unless somebody specifically takes medical or something like, oh, you can't get into the hospital without being screened for COVID. Well, okay, now it's a little more of an issue perhaps than if you were just like, I'm going to go to this hole in the wall pub and try to find someone to feed from. Well, guess what? Hole in the wall pubs still have people in them right now, sitting 6 feet apart. Like,
well, but that is an interesting component there, right? So, like, you go out on the nightlife, there may be some places that are still open. There may still be people going out there, but there are less. So there's more attention on the few that are there. And they're, like you said, expected to be separated by 6 feet. And they're probably expected to have masks on. So, like, as soon as any of those is not the case, that draws attention, right? In a way that there used to be more anonymity in, like, a super busy, crowded nightclub that's bumping and music's going and people are dressed up and drunk and just doing their thing, right? So there's, like, a big difference between those two environments. And it seems like, at least... I mean, I haven't been getting out a ton in the COVID era, but I would assume that it's not as jumping and easy to find people as it would be if there wasn't some, COVID experience.
Have you been to Walmart lately?
Yeah, I've been there, but there are certainly people.
have you been at a gas station lately? Like, these places are just as busy as they've always been. There's just people with masks on. So if I want to do it, then the kindred just have to have a mask put on, just like everybody else. Except it ain't going to affect their breathing. COVID's not a respiratory disease that's going to affect kindred because kindred don't breathe unless they feel like it. So, the hardest part for kindred is all the temperature taking. Like, you can burn a lot of blush of health just trying to pass through a thermometer to get one of those little scan thermometers just to get into a building, perhaps, might be the hardest part of this whole thing for a kindred, right? Like, and that's not at Walmart. Walmart, they're just handing you a mask when you walk in if you ain't got one in your hand. Like, so, you're just talking like where you would go to feed might be different. But most things are not fully shut down in most places.
Yeah, I foresee this being easier for people who already were like Sandman type feeders, right? You do a home invasion, feed on people while they're sleeping, that kind of thing. So maybe those people are okay. The people who are feeding on animals, that's disgusting, but that's what they do.
If somebody in our now, I've only gotten brief character descriptions from a couple people thus far, but if somebody took if Cameron I think is playing a Ventru, if he took feeding exclusion of people with COVID, then I have to make it part of the game. At the end of the day, I'm still going to focus on what my 5 or 6 players decide they want to focus on. So if they're making characters who take a feeding restriction of I won't feed on anyone who's sick with the virus, well, okay, then we'll have to make that part of the thing. That'll have to become a thing. If somebody takes a Ventru feeding requirement of I only feed on the sick, okay, you could have a little subplot of him trying to spread the virus. Like, these things can be played either way. It's just about who the characters are. If nobody's dealing with anything really health related, I'm going to assume that the people are out there. People are social distancing poorly. Okay. Because that's the world I see a lot of. Like, I don't know what world you guys are seeing, but
mixed stuff.
Exactly. And again, this is
something interesting there. He's asking, what if COVID makes blood taste disgusting to kindred? So non-COVID blood becomes premium. That'd be kind of interesting.
COVID is less interesting than me launching a kindred version of something like that. Now you gotta. It doesn't even affect the humans. It only affects the kindred. Humans don't even know they have it. But kindred, it makes it taste like garbage. Like, so the kindred are now spending all their time using influences, allies to try to keep their specific herd from catching this thing.
Mm-hmm.
and they're using politics and the police and everything to like segregate their herd away from everyone else so they don't get it. And nobody in the mortal world can figure out why these things are happening necessarily, or they have to create some other conjured reason why it's going down, right? Like, so to me, that's more interesting than trying to take a real life virus that we're dealing with and like shoehorning it into something that really wouldn't affect a kindred at all. So for me, it'd almost be more interesting to do a kindred version of COVID if I was going to, but unless somebody makes that a focal point of the game, I'm not looking quite at that layered. You know, I could roll this thing 6 months from now and say 6 months from now is where this game's going to take place, and the vaccine is rolling out and it's working fine. Don't even worry about COVID.
Yeah,
I could just do that too.
I mean, it is a fictional take on the world, so you know, you can do whatever you want with it. Yeah, it's an interesting question because I think there's like your interpretation of it is one direction. I think for my interpretation, I think that would make it a lot more challenging and be something that vampires have to navigate. But I can see both sides of that angle. And ultimately, you know, like you said, it's about what you want the game to be focused on and what you don't want to be focused on. So if you have an idea of something you want to hyper focus on, maybe that's a distraction that doesn't need to be there.
Well, I mean, because, okay, so COVID, when you think about it, it's not going to affect allies' contacts. It's really not going to affect resources. It's mostly going to affect herd. And actually, it just puts more emphasis on herd because herd is a guaranteed pool you can feed from, COVID or not. So you've already got this group on lockdown, regardless if COVID exists or not. So boom, herd's there. Otherwise, the routes by which kindred feed are obfuscating and just sneaking into places they're not supposed to be. They can summon animals to feed from at a disgusting, less than satisfying rate, but it can be
Absolute
done.
filth.
Let's not forget the ones that have dominating presence. I mean, okay, so yeah, I know you're supposed to say 6 feet apart, but I would like you to get into my car with me. Like, if you try to push those angles too hard, the vampires will turn to their powers and will make them not a problem. It's almost in the same way that when we talked with Travis Lake a couple weeks ago about D&D, it's like, yeah, plagues become really cool, and then the paladin gets an aura and no one cares anymore. And that's kind of how I feel about like vampire feeding and stuff. Like, it's cool to worry about feeding once, but if that's what you're spending every game session doing is trying to get 5 vampires to feed effectively, like, you're missing, in a tabletop game, you're missing the point. Like, it was more important in Larp, where the amount of blood somebody had coming into a game in a PvP environment was a resource. For me, I'm not positive in a tabletop game that's how we want to spend the bulk of our time, is running feeding scenes.
Right. I mean, it depends on what your emphasis is, right? Because like this is an important thing if you're putting together a game, is to kind of focus on what you want it to be. And, you know, one of the components of Vampire is humanity, the fall of your morals, you know, those towing the line and then just edging over it and breaking bad, so to speak, over time. And so, like, I think it's really easy for a player to gloss over the reality of what their nightly existence is without actually going through the motion of at least once. You know, like, if you actually have to go through it of finding the person, stalking them, manipulating them, getting them alone, doing something against their will, you know, whatever, using a person, you know, like possibly screwing it up and hurting somebody really badly. There's like a lot of things that kind of go into that. And this is every single night, you know?
Yeah, well, and it's because what it boils down to is how quickly are you using that blood? So, you know, I know one thing that I've heard has come out of V5 is that for a vampire to activate apps on their phones, they have to spend a point of blood for blush of health. So they're too cold and dead to activate the heat sensors on a cell phone to, you know, mine uses its thumb to activate. So if you don't have my thumb, you can't get in there. But like you have to push down on it for it to register. Or if you have to do the little grid of boxes to draw the little symbol It doesn't. It detects heat, so you can't. You have to spin to make your hands warm enough. You have to spin the blood just to activate. So if Kindred are using these phone apps like all the time, like they're constantly burning for blush of health, so they're constantly hungry. Yep. So it used to be you didn't worry about it unless a fight happened, because that's probably where you spent all your blood, on some potence and some celerity, maybe some protean. You were healing up after getting wounded. Those gunshot wounds got to heal up somehow, right? Like, so you would patch yourself up with all that blood, and then you're like, oh, I'm hungry. Let's go feed. Well, again, this is where I would rather focus on the core of what I'm doing with the backgrounds in this game, and say, hey, there's an app for that.
Sure.
It's easier for you to order a pizza than it is to go through the trouble of making pizza. Like, just order the pizza, have it delivered to your door, get a few points of blood back. Maybe don't be so stupid with it next time. Like, maybe rushing into the fight's not such a good idea right now. Like,
fair.
You can, I think those are the kinds of things, like, I would rather focus on than, okay, now you're stalking down this high school kid who's running home late from football practice. Like, and then have a combat have to occur because they have to wrestle him to the ground. Like, those things take time.
They do.
Like, it's cool. It's cool at Larp when there's 5 STs helping people do that, or a few narrators, and 95% of the game is still over there running on its own by pure player-driven plot. That's not as cool at the table, in my opinion. Like,
fair enough. Yeah,
it's just me. I mean, I wouldn't want to sit here if we had a 3-hour session, and the first hour would be Jeff just trying to get 3 blood to heal a gunshot wound. Like,
yeah. I mean, it's an important thing to balance, what the needs of the group are and what your table and what your show is going to be about. So, yeah, I can see all those arguments. Now, one of the backgrounds we didn't really talk about too much was resources. We did kind of, but
money's money,
right? And in the World of Darkness in the Masquerade days, it kind of represented like some kind of weirdly renewable resource. Like, you had a business running somewhere maybe that you apparently were managing somehow, but it never comes up. Or you had like a trust fund or something or whatever. How is that going to work in this setting in this game?
So I'm glad you asked. This is something I hadn't revealed yet. So this is something that's going to be going on. I'm going to treat that. I pulled this from another historical experience of mine. In the same way that I'm pulling some of the accounting from my fraternity experience, I am taking my economy and basing it off of Diablo 2. Now, for those of you who maybe don't remember Diablo 2 because you were old enough, your character's got gold, right? Copious amounts of gold. But everybody knows that the real economics of Diablo 2 was the Stone of Jordan ring, the SOJ. Kindred can have resources. They can have shit tons of money. They don't really need it. They use it to control mortals, to pay mortals. They use it to buy maybe some mundane equipment, a car if they want to have one to drive around. It's just easier just to get the retainer that has the car. You don't have to buy it. Like, why do you need money? You don't need money. I played a Larp character for 5 years who never had a dime to his name. You don't always need that much money. Characters that have money can use it to do a certain amount, but money doesn't buy you influence necessarily. You still have to have the dots and influence.
Okay, so are you going the route of you need to spend XP for influence and that kind of stuff? Or are you just saying you do the things that are required and the story says you have it, so you have it?
You're spending experience.
Interesting, okay. All right.
So you do the things in the story to gain it, and then you have to back it up with an XP purchase, or it doesn't hold. It doesn't stick.
Okay.
So for me, the real currency that's going to be purchased that you're going to be purchasing Herd and that you're going to be purchasing these other things with is boons. Boons is the Stone of Jordan ring of Kindred Society. It's what really matters. How many of those do you have in your inventory? How many of those do you have to give? Who do you owe them to? Who do you have them from? That's going to be the real currency of Kindred Society. So, like, you can barter almost anything on the Blood Web. you can sell your if you're in a bad shape and you need herd, you can dial up Foursquare and check into your herd. But to check into that herd, the person who owns it, if you need a herd on the spot, like the nearest available herd is 5 blocks away, but here's the kindred who owes it, and here's what his price is. You have to do this. So like, to me, it's not even that. It's kind of one of those situations where, to me, it's the boons and that really drives the kindred economy, and makes resources a less go-to. Because the moment you make kindred society based around the American dollar, if you're playing in an American city, then the first person who Google Zuckerberg wins. Like the first person who, whatever people like, you get those influencers, whatever. Well, then they got a crap ton of money, so I just take their money. Like you almost have to make money like gold in Diablo 2 was. Like, yes, you can technically use gold to buy stuff. Yes, you can use gold to get the stuff you need to get started. Like, but after a while, it's like I got copious amounts of gold, and what the real economy is, what's the value of my boons? What's the value of my, and that's the part I'd rather focus on. So people have resources. Like, yes, you'll still get whatever your dots say you get. You need to get some flak jackets to arm your ghoul. Yeah, you can use some resources. You can send your ghoul to Walmart, and he can come back out with some golf clubs and whatever for your zany idea of how you're going to take care of a problem. But for me, that's secondary to boons, and boons are not something you can purchase as a background. So
yeah, boons are interesting because they force an interaction. There's some kind of give and take, and they're a negotiation. And they can have different meanings and values. I guess, though, it depends on what the society is doing. So, like, as we learned in LARP, if your players don't respect the boon, it doesn't have a value, right? So it's going to be interesting to see how that plays. Now, as a tabletop setting, you've got a lot more control over what all the NPCs do. So, like, do the other NPC vampires honor this? Yes, they do. Do they take it seriously? Is there a big value to these things? Is it like, you owe me, so you're going to do it, no questions asked kind of thing? Is it I'll do it up to this point, that kind of thing? How long?
They come in levels.
Yeah.
They come in levels. That's the thing about it too. Like,
are you going to say they're explicitly like, you owe me a trivial? Or are you going to just say, dude, you owe me a favor?
No, they'll be codified so that you know what you're dealing with.
Okay.
They have to be, or else they're too abstract. Like you have to know that trivials, a number of trivials equals a minor, a number of minors equals a major, a number of majors equals a life, a number of life equals a blood. Like those things have to be in currencies the same way. It's like a dollar bill, $5 bill, $10 bill. Like you have to know what those are so that you can properly leverage them. And that's the currency of kindred society, is those things. So what I would rather do, and this is why I'm not having people buy these things on their sheets until they establish them, I would rather you, if you needed a feeding scene, get on your app for herd, dial up a nearby herd, we roll it up on some fancy chart that I have chat help me make, or have chat spin some bits to decide what the herd is on the spot, maybe in some way, like a school bus full of children. Oh man, like that's the nearest herd. Yep, this Nosferatu has a school bus full of children because he's a bus driver, and he spends his nights carting them around town to wherever they're needed, and they'll be there in 5 minutes. And you don't have to break the masquerade trying to go find some kid at home doing homework. Like, so it makes life easier. Again, like you can reskin these things however you need to, but like it makes kindred life easier, and it explains how you get your blood, and it also then encourages this guy charges a trivial boon for it's like Uber, a trivial boon to go this far. If he has to drive this far out, it's a minor boon. Like,
okay, yeah.
If you need this much worth of blood from his herd and he has to replenish it, now it's a major boon. Like it's like buying anything online. Like me buying my car. Like when I was ordering it, like I had to go through and pick out all the options that I needed, and that determined the price of it. Like, so it's very similar to that. Like you go on there and you can do that all online. on the blood web.
Sure. Yeah.
And then you can build up your own herd with XP that other kindred then can come need, or other players in your group can be like, hey, I need to use your herd. And you're like, sure, give me a minor boon. Now you've got another minor boon on your sheet. Mm-hmm. So you're going to track your boons like currency. Your actual money resources is going to remain this abstract number of dots that you purchased that you might occasionally pull from to pay off somebody so they don't say something, or, whatever. Like, to pay to get into the bar, you need the $5 cover charge. Oh, here you go.
Mm-hmm.
Covered everybody. Like, so to me, like, those things are, well, they will both be there, but the things that I want to focus the game on is the kindred society aspect of it, more so than the mortal society aspect of it. So,
okay. Yeah, I mean, the only things I could think of where resources may matter is like keeping up appearances for the masquerade, right? So like, paying your rent, paying your bills, being established as living somewhere, buying groceries, like masquerade friendly stuff. But like outside of that, yeah, you're right. It's just extra stuff. It's buying influence. It's getting in places. So yeah, the boons are fascinating. Now in the LARP world, we had a person who kind of where you could register your boons and have them, reinforce those as valued, and it's called a harpy, as Justin just said. And so that was a person. In some games, it was considered an official title, and in other places, it was kind of an unofficial. It's just that person that is the center of the social world. Now, are you envisioning a system where people like literally register their boons with somebody and that they have some kind of enforcement mechanism? Or is this going to be just more of a, between you and me, I know you owe me. Hey, lollygaggers, welcome.
Lollygaggers, hey, welcome.
We are talking.
No, it's going to be just like everything else, Jeff. It's Bitcoin.
Okay.
It's Bitcoin for vampires. You literally don't have paper money anymore, Jeff. You have a card that just tells you.
Okay.
And essentially, that's the direction I'm going with this. You have an account on an app that just tells you where the boon, and the harpy is quite literally a program. Now, there is a person who's a harpy who runs the program, but he's the debt collector if you default. And whenever you sign a boon, it's just going to be like signing shit in real life. There's going to be like end user agreement. You have to click on, like, it's going to be just like dealing with anything online. Like, these are modern kindred. Like, that's the direction I'm going with this thing. Like,
right on. For those of you guys just joining us, we are talking about Vampire the Masquerade, and we're talking specifically about the backgrounds. So like allies, influence, contacts, resources, retainers, I think I already said that one. Herd, all these different ideas that are ways that your character kind of influences the world or interacts with it in a power kind of sense. And we're looking at a modern take on it. So like, instead of the World of Darkness in the 1990s where things were intended for the original books, we're living in 2020. So things are very different. And, there's, cameras everywhere. There's internet, there's influencers, like all this kind of crazy stuff. So we've been kind of going through and looking at how these systems play, how they work, and how they may have been changed or need to be changed for our upcoming game that Dustin's going to be running for us. So I'm kind of teasing it out of him, finding out exactly how he intends to run some of this stuff.
I'm going to be running a game called iKindred, and it's literally going to be the names of the phones that Kindred carry. And they use their apps on there to take care of the things they need for their unlife, to make their unlives easier.
Mm-hmm.
So, the only thing that doesn't really get easier is Haven. Haven doesn't really get easier because you still just have to have a place and you have to secure it. And that part is, there's some things that you could do on there. You could get like the keyhole app that'll let you like look out your doorbell when you're out to make sure no one's getting into your house, like in your Haven. So those kind of technologies still exist, but those are very much just using standard mortal technology. Like, there's really not anything too special about them as far as those, because those would still just be security dots. If you have dots in security, you know how to secure your Haven. You're not dealing with anything too special there. But the idea, a lot of the crux of what I'm dealing with, and this is a call I'm just making for my own homebrewed city in my own homebrew campaign for this is that the advancement in digital camera will pick up kindred the way that old school cameras did not, because otherwise none of it really mattered. If a person with a cell phone can't really catch you on camera because you're blurry and they can't really focus it, then whether or not that breaches a masquerade becomes kind of iffy.
Right.
So I'm kind of making the leap that the newest, most modern digital cameras, which would include things like keyhole, that's backup, the cameras on, backup cameras on cars and vans, like, dashboard cameras and stuff for police vehicles, will clearly pick up a kindred.
Interesting. Yeah. So in the old games, one of the features was that there was some kind of supernatural element that protected vampires from scrutiny. So, like, if you took a picture of somebody or looked at a video recording of them, for whatever reason, like there's a lens flare that happens to occur and it just kind of obscures part of the face enough that you can't make out who it is. Or, there's like a dust particle or, any number of random things that can go on that causes that image to be indecipherable in terms of figuring out who that person is. So you're looking at completely getting rid of that then. That's interesting.
Well, the older technologies it'll still work on.
Okay.
So anybody with the old Polaroid, it still won't develop. Anybody with the old school drop it off at the CVS, get your pictures developed, it still won't work on. Anybody with the old school outdated technologies, those cameras don't work. They're not true digital cameras. Like those things, it would still work as always. But cameras have advanced to the point now where they do in fact pick up. Unless you have unless you're one of them, like a La Sombra, who has a specific flaw where they don't cast reflection. Like that might be a bigger deal. Because I think a lot of the camera originally stuff was based on the idea that kindred didn't cast reflection. And then they kind of like thought about it more and they're like, well, most kindred actually do cast reflection. We'll just make it blurry or, the lens flare sort of effect, sort of deal. But I think the true ones that don't cast reflection, like you might be able to make more of an argument that it doesn't pick them up as well. But I think the way that digital picks up and does things is different than the way that fiber optics. I think the way that the old optical cameras function, I think, is different than how digital cameras function. So
you're looking at it as a technology was the cause of the blurring effect rather than a supernatural component. Okay.
Yes, it was the supernatural, how the supernatural interacted with the technology at that time versus how new age technology interacts with the same thing is different.
Okay. Interesting.
The advancements that hit a point that, and what this does is it creates this world where the kindred need to control those spheres of mortal influence. So the newer age vampires are the ones more capable of that. The older ones are pulling a Lestat and hanging out somewhere remote because they can't dare go into the city where people live now. It's too dangerous. They don't want to break the masquerade either. They're not going Sabbat because of it. But some of them are probably deciding they're going to take a nap because society looks like it might crumble itself at any moment. They can wake up and this will all be a bad memory. A lot of this tech may go away and the infrastructures that support it may crumble to the ground in another 10 to 15 years at the rate things are going. Look at the infighting amongst the humans. Like they'll blow this whole thing up and I'll wake back up and it'll be fine. So it's very likely that some of this, even 9th generation, 30 years ago, embraced vampires are probably thinking like, maybe I need to sleep this one out. Like I can't keep up. Like I'm static creature. These things are changing rapidly. Like,
sure.
So, maybe that's what I'm saying. Like, I think most of the kindred you're going to run into are going to be relatively high generation. They're going to be 12, 13, 10, because they're the ones that are going to be the most capable of adapting.
I can see that. Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting. You're talking about like the ring, kind of security system, because like, you would think, okay, that's great. You're at your haven. You want to know if somebody's invading your house. You get the extra little notification. You can see what's going on out there. But on the flip side, that information is going somewhere outside of your control to some service out there. And that's another possible leak of the Masquerade. The more you're interfacing with these systems, the more precarious that Masquerade gets. So it's really interesting.
Right.
That going to be something you're worried about, like that you're going to have us?
These things are mostly contained through the dark web part.
Okay.
So I think in the same way that if you think of how like anarchists probably use the dark web in modern society, or if you want to think like terrorist cells or anyone else, like they're using the internet. Technically the same internet we're all using. But they know how to encode these things and encrypt them and use them in ways that like it would take a skilled mortal to do it. Hey, we got another raid. Thank you, Diesel Shot, for the raid.
Welcome. Thank you.
So I think what you're talking about is that this thing is clearly encrypted, and unless somebody takes a whole bunch of dots and computers, like it's mostly hand waved. It just works. I'm not dealing. Okay, so here's what I'm not dealing with. I'm not dealing with pattern spiders.
Yeah.
I'm not dealing with the technocracy. Those words will not come up. I am not dealing with mages. I'm not dealing with wraiths unless somebody specifically decides to be Giovanni. I'm not dealing with those things so that I have to explain it away in any other way than it works for Kindred and it protects the Masquerade until some mortal digs too far. And then there's another story on the internet about strange creatures that shadow puppet the government, because you can't find those on the mortal internet anywhere. And then everyone gets to decide whether or not they believe that it's influence from the left, the right, third political parties, crazy nut jobs, some cult leader, or a church, or they can attribute it to whatever they want to. But most people are not going to be like, "Yep, vampires. That's the answer." Like, the mortals have so much plausible deniability with the internet today. Like, you can fake news anything now if you want to. Just hashtag it fake news, and hell, half the population will immediately disregard it. So, I mean, this is the world that is ripe for Kindred if they can just utilize these things, and at the end of the day, if somebody stumbles across it, it's fake news.
Yep, it's an interesting setting. So if you're from the raid and you just kind of checked in, we have been talking about World of Darkness Vampire, specifically Masquerade, and we're talking about the way that the world in 2020 would reflect differently than it did in the 90s for this game setting. And we're talking about ways that our upcoming game is going to adjust, and how we're going to how we as players and how Dustin as a ST storyteller are going to make adjustments to kind of bring these elements into play. So if you've ever played one of these, chime in if you got questions or ideas.
Yeah.
It's
so I mean, I think that's kind of where I'm going with it. Like I said, I can't control what the disciplines do. There might be some interesting questions that get brought up by players who have a discipline, like, how does this discipline now work with this? And I'd be like, oh, that's kind of cool. Like, hadn't considered that, but we'll work it out. But I think I get the luxury of knowing what the dots are on the sheet and looking at those disciplines ahead of time and saying, okay, here's what these things do. Like, I think it would be relatively cool if someone was a gangrel, if there was a gangrel app that required them to retina scan their red eyes. They fire up their Eyes of the Night and boom, they can now get into their gangrel only app. Like, interesting.
Yeah.
I could set up apps for certain clans. Like, who's not to say that there isn't their own extra intranet for Clan Tremere? Like, how is there not? Right? So if the Tremere didn't already have Blood.net before Blood.net, I would be very disappointed in the Tremere. So, and they got a whole extra level of wonk-wooge that, is, I mean, there's a lot there. So if someone decides they're going to play Tremere, like, that's a whole nother level of like things that you got to look into. They could have their entire thaumaturgy rituals and everything on a PDF. Like, it could be again encrypted. All you have to say is the word encrypted, and boom, most of the problems of the Masquerade go away. Like, because now it's just an arbitrary roll of a difficulty. Like, I don't have to understand the science of encryption to be able to be like, nah, it's encrypted.
Sure. Yeah, it's
So-
just, I guess some of the questions that I've been posing are more, I know there are ways to manage it one way or the other.
Right.
It's more of which one are you going for? So I understand the world that my character needs to be built for.
I think really what it boils down to is I think once some of the plot elements like kick in,
Mhm.
most of those things aren't going to be the parts people worry too much about.
Sure.
Because this is not a LARP.
Mm-hmm.
So this isn't a complete sandbox world for you just go play in. Like,
Mhm.
yeah, there's a world, and yeah, it's going to have some sandboxy elements. You're going to be able to, guys are going to be able to do what you want to with your haven, set it up how you think you need to for defense. There's going to be people that you have to go investigate and do things with, and you guys are going to go out and figure out how to do those things. A lot of these other subsystems are obstacles you have to overcome, or they're utilities for you to utilize to make those parts of your own life easier, so you can focus more on what the raw meat of the actual story is. It's in the same way that, like, a lot of times for like in a D&D campaign, like, how often do you worry if you ate 3 meals?
Sure.
You know, like, so do I want to really worry about how much time Bowron spends cooking in the kitchen? Like, we discussed that there's cooking going on every now and then.
Mhm.
And occasionally we'll full describe a meal. But we don't do it every day. So I kind of feel like Vampire's the same thing. Like, you're going to be dealing with these other issues that come up that are going to be more of the plot points, and you're going to be dealing with them as a group and like investigating and figuring things out and dealing with stuff. And then occasionally you might need to get a retainer. You might need to deal with herd. Like,
Right.
That's why they're the third section of the character sheet, because they're not the main course by any stretch of the imagination, but they have to be there. You can't just ignore them either. So.
Yeah. It's just a fascinating component because, like we were talking about earlier, the World of Darkness keeps them very nebulous and open for interpretation, and so
Right.
it's an interesting thing. You know, a lot of people are going to interpret it in different ways, and it's just really interesting to see why people interpret the rules the way they do. You know, like what advantage they're getting out of that interpretation, how applying that or not applying it is relevant or irrelevant. You know, and it gives you a lot of information about, you know, what that experience is going to be like. You know, like what sorts of things you could expect to be interacting with. You know, so like I'm looking forward to it. Obviously, I'm pumped. So you know, Vampire is a great game. I love Vampire.
Yep.
I'm really interested though in just I don't know if we did another LARP thing, which I'm sure we'll never do again. But it would be really fascinating to try to keep all this together and interpret that in that setting and see how that would influence stuff.
Well, I remember the first time that, and this is not the event that inspired this idea, but I remember the first time at LARP when someone super tech savvy first brought to me the idea that they were just going to triangulate a cell phone off of a satellite using computers and their super card that had an expensive, you know, laptop on it. Like, they were just going to triangulate and figure out the location of this NPC or this thing based on that alone.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like dumbfounded. I was like, you can do that? And apparently that was a thing that could be done then. Like, that was like a newer thing. Like, that was a new human technology, if you will, right? Like, But immediately, because it existed in real world and it was something that was being done by police stations and police forces trying to find missing people, this, that, the other, it became a very real thing that you can't just disregard when you're running a game now in that setting. So I had to honor it, and we did honor it. I mean, luckily they didn't get to just interfere with the scene because time travel is not a thing, though. They still had to get vehicles, drive to location once they found it, and they were far enough away.
Give the Tremere a little bit of time, Dustin.
But what it did was it proposed this idea, though, that like as technologies advance, Kindred are going to try to pick them up and use them. There's no reason they wouldn't. So, and the only reason you come up with is, well, Masquerade. Well, if Kindred are already controlling, when you're playing Vampire, the notion is that Kindred control mortal society. Mortals are mostly enslaved to them, as long as they don't screw anything up too badly fighting with each other.
Mhm.
And that's the crux of where I want this game to be. This game has all these cool features that I'm laying out there first to give you an idea what the setting is. At the end of the day, this is a battle between two political parties, the Sabbat and the Camarilla.
All right.
And the way that that war is waged between the two is really where I want the focus of the game to be.
Gotcha. Well, that's good to know.
Because at the end of the day, how kindred interact with each other is important. But the philosophical difference between the Camarilla and the Sabbat and how they can't wage open war on each other the way that they used to in the 90s.
Yeah, Cold War scenarios would be interesting.
They can't wage that war anymore because digital cameras are too prevalent.
Mm-hmm.
Digital cameras are everywhere. And even the Sabbat, in Sabbat-held cities, still upheld a masquerade because they were just as susceptible to the Inquisition as anything else. So even the Sabbat, in an attempt to take any kind of foothold in a Camarilla city or do anything else in a Camarilla city, would have to be very clever about how they went about doing it.
Mm-hmm.
They'd have to be very creative in how they wanted to set themselves up. They would have to utilize Elysium. They would have to come meet on grounds of we're right, not because we can pummel you to death or mass embrace 10 people and create a problem for you and then leave your city so that you have to deal with it. But we need the kindred who control all these things to side with us. We need to control the same way that Twitch and someone else might be fighting to keep high-powered streamers on their side. So does the Camarilla and Sabbat need to convince the high-powered kindred to come to their side.
Absolutely.
And that is ultimately, at the end of the day, what the struggle is between these factions now. Is it's not bloodbaths in the street. Like, it is a little more of an influence war, and it does touch a little more into these backgrounds. And the Sabbat are right there on the same apps with everybody else. Like,
that's going to be fascinating.
So,
the little stupid thing that I caught over here looking at the stream. Occasionally, the captioning right down here, there it is. It does a little funny thing, and it gets some things wrong. I think I said consider, and it filled it in as David Schwimmer. So that's awesome. That's one of my favorites to date. So
that's just a little nugget extra for those of you who read this instead of listen to it. So.
Oh God! Of all things, like of course I was talking about David Schwimmer, right?
David Schwimmer.
It's ridiculous. But yeah, I think that's going to be fascinating.
Times are really confused.
Yeah. I think it's going to be a really fascinating setting because the concept of Elysium, like the sacred ground where anyone can go and there's no violence, battle of political wills, trying to push an agenda and that kind of stuff. There's more opportunity for those like forbidden conversations, I guess, to happen, and the give and take and the politics that it's going to be really interesting.
All I'm going to say is Elysium is the one place where when they go there, it's like going into a boardroom business meeting. Where, like everyone walks in, and the first thing they'll have to do is they'll have to set down their phones. Like it's going to be like the one place where it's going to feel more old school because it has to.
Yeah.
Like, so that's going to be like, that'll be the one place where, like, when you guys go there, once I decide exactly like what the Elysium is going to be exactly, like when they go there, and it's going to be like phone checks at the door. It's not gun checks. Nobody's checking for your guns or your weapons. It's phone checks. Like,
nice. Yeah, the real danger.
Right, the real danger. Yeah,
I like that. Yeah, so I got good feelings about this game. I think it's gonna be nice, and I think it's gonna be entertaining for people. I'm fascinated to see what you do with it. I'm not sure how long you intend to run it. Hopefully it's good and it goes for a good decent amount of time. We get to develop some characters out in the long haul.
I think I got an initial plot line set up. Once that initial plot line runs its course, and I don't know how long I can string that part along before I have to drop the plot twist on it. But I got the first initial plot twist done, and when that plot twist is done, then you guys will be going into the city proper. So it's like I got like the introductory like stuff set up, but like a lot of it is still player driven to a degree. Like you guys are gonna, through creating characters and like interactions in the game, you guys are gonna like decide to want to get involved in things that I hadn't considered, and I'll be doing a lot of it on the fly and then patching it up after the fact. Because you know that's what GMing and STing is at the end of the day, is patching things up after the fact.
Just plug holes.
Yeah, just plugging in some holes and figuring out like, well, this is what I did, so this is what I have to honor, and now I'll kind of figure out like, just in our conversation today, you're asking questions about things like I hadn't fully considered, but like I had some ideas of. So like you guys are going to ask more of those questions in character, and I'm going to have to come up with a judgment call on the fly and be like, yep, this is how we're going to run this, and it'll become codified, like try to be consistent with it throughout the game.
Right. Yeah.
But
you know
hit
me.
a point.
I'm fascinated by that stuff. So like,
yeah. But I mean, there's other people in our group
people
playing that are going to be much more, I think, plot hawkish, and they're going to want to like go deal with the X, Y's, and Z's. So I'm trying to set up I don't want them to come across as like side quest-ish, but I want there to be, there's going to be a fair number of tasks and things that have to be done in the name of the city, in the name of the prince and the domain, in the name of possibly your primogen, like depending on where I want them all to come from, like, and have those things done. And then, you know, you guys do these things and then you get a bit of reward for it. And like, you're going through this accounting process, and like I'll spoil the first one for you.
Oh no!
I'll spoil the first one.
You're gonna spoil it? Come on, man!
I'll spoil the first one.
Don't do it.
Your collective sires are going to need you to hunt down a masquerade breaker and show you guys exactly what happens when you violate the first tradition.
That's rough. It's a good way to do it, though.
Because he's in your area hiding out in this small town that you guys are being put into. So you're going to get like a dossier. You're going to get his Facebook profile of, you know, where you can find him, locate his possible havens, you know, like all that stuff's getting taken care of in the city, but we think he's out here somewhere establishing. Find him, track him down, bring him, and your sires are going to have right to carry out what the prince has decreed, because the prince ain't coming to do it in person.
Makes sense.
Like, they will carry it out because they've been told they can, and then you guys will be taught the first lesson of vampirism, what happens when you break the masquerade, and you will get to see it then, like if you successfully bring him in. So
very nice, very nice. Well, Dustin, we are at the end of our time here, so good conversation. I enjoy this. I'm looking forward to it. It's gonna be cool. So this is usually a time where we start plugging the hell out of all of our weekly activities. And as you can see down in the panels below, if I can navigate my mirror image here, down there somewhere, you'll see we have all kinds of shows. And
was down hard to do mirrored?
It's left and right.
Was down difficult in the mirror, Jeff? I just was curious. I mean, left and right I get, but down? That was,
yeah, I don't know.
Down's still down, right? Okay.
You know, you do this show and your brain just goes. You know, all it takes is just a mirror image effect here to really throw off everything. I don't understand that, but your brain just like goes nuts. Anyway. So as we do, we make fun of each other a lot, and that comes up in a lot of our shows. So next week on Monday, we'll be doing this show again. Probably Dustin and I hanging out, talking shit to each other again, because that's what we do. So if you got a concept, an idea, a question that you want brought up as a topic, let us know in the Discord, and I'll go ahead and link that real fast for you. So join us up there. You can find us doing all kinds of stuff. Including what we do on Tuesday nights. So Tuesdays, that's going to be our kind of our Talent Tuesday, as I've been calling it. That's Bardic Knowledge, which is Cam's show. He puts together music for our games. He's got a music background. He shows us how to actually create the music theory behind it, and walks you through like step by step in his whole process. And it's really interesting. It's produced a lot of really good music that we've had for most of our shows. And it's definitely enhanced everything we've been up to. And if that wasn't enough, we immediately go after that show directly into DM to Art. And that's our DM Levi, who puts that one on. and he is an art teacher. And similar to how Cam goes into the details, Levi shows you all the sorts of techniques and ways of navigating Photoshop, actual, hand-drawn stuff. And he's been putting together the art for our character portraits, and that's been fucking cool. So like lately he's been working on my character Sid, and it's been awesome. So you go on there, he keeps you entertained, he shows you some cool stuff. Dustin, what are we doing Wednesday?
We're playing All Flesh Must Be Eaten. I believe Wednesday at 10 p.m. Levi will be running our All Flesh Must Be Eaten game called Don't Sleep, where a mostly brand new set of characters just introduced last game, plus 2 returning characters who have lived for various amounts of time there. May or may not survive the first 5 minutes of this game, where we are currently surrounded by a whole horde of zombies inside of an auto zone.
Auto region?
Auto region. It's auto zone.
Get in the region. Auto region. Come on now.
Auto region. The Battle of Auto Region Part 2, 3. I don't know. Maybe it's the Battle of Auto Region Part 2. We have to conclude that chat-induced battle. And there's a lot of zombies, so I got an idea. I think it's Duke's turn in initiative, and I know what Duke's going to do.
Actually, it's my turn.
I think. It's you and then me. I think it's like there's 2 of you.
Thick Tony is down to his last health point.
He's got 1 hit point.
He is the only person inside the auto region, standing next to a trap door and like 5 zombies.
And we've let chat have at least 1 payday since then. So who knows how many more will show up? Like it's a lot. It's a lot. So
yeah, Malice, you bring it. You saying you're gonna buy more zombies? Like you think you could take down Thick Tony? Thick Tony only takes damage from himself, man. No one's gonna take out Thick Tony except for Thick Tony.
And it's Thick Tony's turn. Yeah. So
I mean,
you might be too late. You might come with bits and be too late. That's all I'm saying.
Yeah, so get in there and screw us up. It's a lot of fun. We do a ton of improv and just talking shit, and I love it. It's fun. So that brings us to Thursday night, which is video games, random stuff for the time being. So I don't know what we're going to have this week. If we're going to rope some of the other guys into some games, we'll do that. Otherwise, I may play some 7 Days to Die or Dead by Daylight or something else. Up to what people are interested. Play Stellaris, maybe.
I am working every night this week. Literally tonight all the way through next Monday. So.
Gotcha. Wow, that is devastating, man.
Yeah.
Well,
so I don't think I'll be. I don't go until like later. I'm working night shift a couple nights this week, but so I don't go into like 11, but probably early enough that I can't probably hop on to be on video game night with you. But
maybe we'll do something chat oriented.
Life will go back to normal, and maybe I can play again. But
yeah, maybe we'll do something chat oriented. Maybe grab like the Jackbox games or something and see if we can get some of you guys into play. Keep me company, and that'll be fun. Which brings us to Fridays. Friday has become our day to do 3D printing. So Clint has been coming on and doing some pretty cool streams, showing us how the 3D printer works, and we get to watch it, some cool music, and people have been showing up and just having like a hell of a chat room in there. It's been awesome. Like people just kind of coming in and just having a good time. I don't know. It's like hanging out at the kitchen's, a kitchen counter in the middle of a party. It's like, it's very relaxing, like Malice says. Yeah.
I heavily pushed for him to name his show Some Assembly Required.
Oh yeah, that'd be good. That's nice.
But he hasn't created an overlay for it yet, so or referred to it as that. So I've been pushing. So tell Clint that you want the name of the show to be Some Assembly Required.
There you go. That's it.
And we'll make him make an image for it.
That would be great. Maybe I'll 3D print it. So that brings us to Saturday. Is this an Everstorm weekend?
It is.
I feel like it is. Yeah, it is.
It is. Yeah. We're back to Everstorm Saturday.
Yes. All right. So that's our 5th edition Dungeons and Dragons game. We are homebrew. We are dealing with Titans right now. So we have got ourselves into some weird, wacky shit right now. Levi, as our DM, has put us into a very weird spot. We are underneath a magma-filled cave system where there is a dead or dying Titan trying to be reborn, And there was an evil force of other titans coming to smack him down. And in the middle of that, one of our allies has decided to be mind-controlled and just walk into the lava. So, I don't know. We'll see if Clint's character lives for more than 2 seconds of the game. And
he's gonna live.
Oh, he'll live. You're just gonna turn him into an elf, and then he T1000s into the lava. Okay.
Yeah.
Nice. So you'll have to tune in.
I'm not concerned.
We'll see. I don't know. You have to have a body to reincarnate. So after that, after you tune in for that, we have anything on Sunday, or are we all offline on Sundays now?
This coming Sunday will be offline. It's my work Sunday.
That's what I thought.
So this Sunday will be a small reprieve from us being on stream, and then next Monday's Wisdom Check again.
Mm-hmm. Good stuff. And then that's our week. But last thing we got to plug here is to make sure you support the art of David Lee Pancake. He does awesome sculptures of dragons and other things like our characters. So we actually, Dustin, yours is almost done. I saw him putting together the trident.
Sweet.
He was blacksmithing in the other room. It was crazy.
What? He's blacksmithing?
Not blacksmithing, but he was working with real metal and hammering the shit out of it. So yeah, there's a trident. It's metal. It's awesome.
I need to see this thing at some point. Like I saw it when he was working on it first on stream, and I haven't checked back in a while. If he's done any on stream, I haven't seen it.
Yeah, he's taking a break from streaming, so you probably won't be able to see it there. But
maybe why I haven't seen him.
Yeah, he did the crocodile coat and everything, so it's
that's fantastic.
Pretty damn good. He's got to do the ghost hand, which he's trying to figure out how to do, and then there's like maybe 1 or 2 small details, and then it's painting time. So
would not have thought that my character would be the difficult one.
Right. So there's that. So tune in for that. He is taking a break, like I said, from streaming his content, but he still does have a YouTube, and he also still has a Patreon and his website. So go check that out. And I think that's all of our plugs. So do we have anything else to say, or raid target, or anything of those sorts?
I was trying to think if there was anything else. Nope. I think we are good. I will find us a real quick raid target here. Let me just go down our list of friendly streams that are online.
Yeah. So thank you, chat. As always, it's been great. We are closing in on our last show for the Wisdom Check soon enough. So the end of this month.
We're going to create it.
And so we've been really pumped to have this show and to share what we got with you guys. And Dustin and I have got some ideas for the future. So in the new year, be on the lookout for 2 new shows plugging in on Thursday and Monday. And that's going to be cool. The end, Malice. Maybe we'll return again as like the McRib kind of does. You know, it just like floats up every once in a while and does something. But Dustin and I are looking to do something different and bring you guys as the chat and the community in. And I think we got something nice. So be on the lookout for that in the new year.
Raid channel.
And Dustin is almost there. He's almost got it.
Start raid. Oh, it won't let me raid him. It says something went wrong. Try running that quick action again later.
Ooh.
Hold on. I'm going to refresh the screen real quick.
Should we give him a little hint of what may be coming in the new year? Or you want to keep it?
Yeah, I was gonna ask if you wanted to go ahead and reveal that at this point. I think we should.
Are we settled on the name?
I think for both, yes.
Right.
I am. Nobody's objecting.
I like
if no one objects, we get to do what we want to.
I like it.
That's how I feel about it.
Yeah. So Mondays, we have decided we want to get more chat interaction, and one of the things that Dustin and I love doing that we haven't been doing much of lately is playing board games. And so we found Tabletop Simulator, and there's a way to play just about every board game under the sun there. And so Dustin and I want to invite people from the community to come play board games with us. So if you're interested in that, go pick up Tabletop Simulator. And on Monday nights, we're going to be doing All Aboard. And that's going to be the show where we play board games with you. And so we'll do some polling of what games maybe to play and all that kind of stuff, and kind of come up with a way for you guys to slot in. You know, if we have too many people are interested, we'll have like kind of a list of who comes on and that kind of stuff. And hopefully you guys are interested in that, because I would love to play more board games. And then Thursday night, Thursday night is our other show that we are planning to do that is going to be more about video games that are interactive. So we're going to be talking about Jackbox. We're going to be talking about
Among Us.
Among Us. There we go. I was like, aboard us? No, Among Us. So we're going to be, calling you guys out for being sus. I get to do it back for a change. It's going to be nice. So hopefully you will all be interested, and we're calling that one Looking for Group. So hopefully we'll put out the call, and you guys will all come along. So I'm pumped. I'm really excited for it. Like, I think this is going to be a fun new year.